Hello, you beautiful tall glass of lemonade. This is your mortgage friend, Charlie Smiley, and welcome to my thing here. You are not alone with Charlie Smiley. Episode two. Episode one, we just received the CPI report, the inflation report through the eyes of consumers. Since then, we've received the PPI report, which is the inflation report through the eyes of producers, and we got the long anticipated Fed decision yesterday. And before we get into all of that, and we will, I promise you that, I want to start out with a statistic. Today's stat of the day: an estimated 77% of potential home buyers, and I'm going to look at the stat over here where I have it written down. 77% of potential home buyers will not consider purchasing a home that isn't move-in ready. That stat came from Curbio Inc.'s newly released Preparing to Sell 2022 Home Improvement Report. So it's data from 2022, but it came out this week, June 2023. And so, in other words, people want turnkey properties. If you're trying to sell a fixer-upper and you can put a little bit of money in to, get it righted, it's going to move a lot faster. People don't want a project right now; they want to move into something that is ready to go. So now let's go back to where we left off with the last episode. Last episode, we just received the CPI report. It was pretty good, actually. The headline numbers, if you remember, were very, very good. And that was basically on the heels of some really great energy numbers from May, because energy prices came down, oil prices came down, gas prices came down. Now we know that that's going to be going in reverse soon because China just reduced its central banking rate, which means that there's going to be a whole lot of demand over there in China for oil. So prices are going to go up globally. And also, Saudi Arabia decided that they are going to start reducing their production of oil. And that also will make oil prices go up. So the headline numbers are going to go up, but the core numbers don't include energy. So we don't have to worry about that. Now, the core numbers last time, I don't know if you remember, they were being propped up by two things that are actually lagging indicators. And we're going to get into lags in a minute when we talk about the Fed's decision. The two things that were propping it up were rents. They said rents are skyrocketing, but we know that they're not, that they're looking at old data. It's how they're gathering the data through panels that's making it look a lot higher than it actually is, because all of the real-time metrics, apartment list, Zillow, CoreLogic, Case Shiller, uh, Redfin, they're all pointing to rents coming down. And the other one was used cars. And used cars, we know that's also data that's in arrears. It's really February data that's looking more prominent in the May numbers. But when we look at the Manheim used car reports and car gurus, we do see used car prices are actually coming down. So we know that even the core numbers are actually a lot better than what was in that report. So yesterday we received the PPI report, and it was good. It wasn't outstanding, but it did show that through the lens of producers, that inflation is starting to subside, and the Fed gave its decision. And this was actually really interesting. They decided to skip. In other words, after 10 consecutive meetings where they decided to hike the rate, which is a record, and we haven't ever raised our federal funds rate 5% the way we have so fast. That's also a record. But they finally decided that this time they are not going to increase it. But it's not a pause, it's a skip. What's a skip? I think I mentioned before, it's like wagging your finger saying, we're not going to hike it this time, but next time we probably will. Well, they actually signaled that they're going to have at least two more hikes within before the year is up. So they are going to be increasing the federal funds rate. It's worse than that, though. I want to read you a quote from Jerome Powell when he made the announcement. Here we go. I'm going to read you two quotes, but the first one: it will be appropriate to cut rates at such time as inflation is coming down really significantly. And again, we're talking about a couple of years out. In other words, the Fed is expecting to not cut rates for at least a couple of years. They are staying this course. To them, inflation is on fire, even though what we're seeing in real time and through the CPI reports and PPI and PCE reports, we are seeing things subsiding, but not the Fed. They don't see any of that. They are going to stay the course. So the why am I bringing this up, and why did I mention lags with the Fed? Every decision the Fed makes, it doesn't really impact the economy right away. There's a lag time, just like how there's a lag time with rents when they look at rents. There's also a lag time with the decisions they make and when it affects us. In fact, I heard one economist put it eloquently. We have these 10 rate hikes. Right now, we are only feeling the effects of the first two, which was a 25 basis point rate hike and a 50 basis point rate hike. The next eight we haven't felt yet. That that is to come. And after those first two, the next four were 75 basis point rate hikes. So these were pretty drastic shocks to the system. And we're going to see what becomes of that. So now I'm going to read you a second quote from Jerome Powell. He says, "We have been seeing the effects of our policy tightening and demand in the most interest rate sensitive sectors of the economy, especially housing and investment. It will take time, however, for the full effects of monetary restraint to be realized, especially on inflation." So this, in a nutshell, is how what they're doing works and why they're doing it. When inflation is hot, the Fed, and this has been a trend for since the Great Depression, the Fed will raise the federal funds rate. They raise the federal funds rate, then we go into a recession. When we go into a recession, people tighten their belts, they stop spending, and then mortgage rates come down. They're not doing this for mortgage rates. They're actually doing this to stave off inflation. But when inflation comes down, mortgage rates come down. So it's kind of, to the mortgage professionals, one and the same. So we had three bank failures recently. And what happens with the bank failures, Fed raises the federal funds rate, and now people are taking their deposits out of these banks and they're putting them into money markets and CDs. Because let's face it, if you have $100,000 in a checking account or a savings account and it's not getting any interest, or it's getting an eighth of a point interest, and there's another opportunity to park it somewhere where it could get 4 or 5% interest, you're going to take out your deposits and you're going to put it into the money market or the CD. You're going to want to get a little bit of return on your investment. Well, these banks are experiencing that flight of deposits. At the same time, they're they can't lend as much because their rates are higher, so there's a lot less demand to get loans for car loans, business loans, you name it, commercial real estate. You've probably heard the commercial real estate is having problems of its own, especially since the pandemic and people working remote, and the properties aren't receiving the same amount of income as they used to, and now they have to refinance, and they're underwater, a lot of them. Well, anyway, if their assets aren't earning as much and people are trying to pull their money out, there's a flight of deposits. Now they have liquidity issues. And that's why we saw some recent bank failures. And that's what's causing it. But the thing is that's only after two of those rate hikes made their way through our economy. Wait until the rest of the eight make their way through, and the next two that they say are going to come later this year. So that's not the only thing the Fed looks at. The Fed not only looks at inflation, they look at jobs. What they're trying to accomplish is what they call a soft landing. A soft landing is where they stave off inflation and at the same time keep us out of recession. So they're looking at jobs and keeping that intact while at the same time bringing down inflation. And in years, all the years since the Great Depression that they've tried to do this, they've never accomplished a soft landing. This is a unicorn that they've never actually caught. They never captured this unicorn. very elusive, this unicorn. But this time, it's almost like Lucy pulling the ball away from Charlie Brown. Like, oh yeah, this time I'm going to let you kick it, and he's not going to kick it. I have very little faith that we're going to get a soft landing. If it's anything like if past this prologue, we're going to have another recession. Um, the jobless claims. Let's talk about jobs for a second, because today we got our weekly jobless claims from last week. And this is more of a real-time indicator than other jobs reports. Like the BLS jobs report, that's a month in arrears. The ADP jobs report, a month in arrears. The Challenger Christmas jobs report, the JOLTS report. All of these have a little bit of a delay, a little bit of a lag. But the weekly jobless claims reports, that's more real-time. So what we saw was 262,000 initial jobless claims, which matched 262,000 that we had from the week before last week. The market was expecting 245,000. So it was a little worse than the market expected. And again, we don't root for hardships. We don't want your neighbor or your cousin or your aunt or your uncle to lose their job if they're working paycheck to paycheck and they don't have the job security. We don't root for hardships. This is just the relationship. When there's cracks in the jobs market, people tighten their belts, they don't spend as much. And when they don't spend as much, that's deflationary, which is good for mortgage rates. But it's also a signal that maybe those rate hikes that the Fed was implementing are actually starting to hit the job market and actually starting to cool it. We shall see. We received some retail jobs numbers too today, and those actually were a little inflationary. The market was expecting a contraction of 0.2%, but it expanded at 0.3%, which again, good for your cousin who's in a job insecure situation or your uncle who's paycheck to paycheck. We don't want hardships for anyone, but that is inflationary a little bit. And then we had dueling manufacturing surveys. Usually when these surveys come out, the Empire State Manufacturing Survey and the Philadelphia Fed Manufacturing Survey, the Empire State one comes out first. Then a day or two later, the Philadelphia Fed one comes out. The Philadelphia Fed one is always more reliable and trusted by economists. But, together they tell a good story. Well, this time around, they came out on the same day, and that was today. And they were a little bit more optimistic than expected. However, inside the surveys was some interesting information. Like first, the top line numbers. The Empire State Survey was expecting a readout of -16 after a -31.8 in May, but it was in positive territory. It was 6.6. The Philadelphia Fed Manufacturing Survey was expected to fall 13.7 points, but it only fell 10.4 points, which is still negative, just not as negative as expected. And last month, it was -14.8. But inside the numbers, the Empire State Survey, and I'm reading a little bit over here just so I get this right for you. I want you to have the information. It showed that employment and hours worked continued to contract while selling price increases started slowing. So even though there was some optimism among these people that were surveyed, they are reporting that prices are coming down, and also that there's been a little bit softer wage growth and wages. And that is actually deflationary and good for rates. And the Philadelphia survey showed that new orders remained negative and prices remained below the long run averages. And there's a quote here: expectations for growth over the next 6 months remained tempered. So the Philadelphia survey is actually also deflationary despite the top line numbers. Now, a few bits of news. I love going through the headlines, and I'm only going to hit on a couple of them. Lakefront property listings since February surged $6 billion. That's according to the M report. Architectural Digest reported, had a nice little article about affordable bathroom upgrades that can take your space from Lackluster to Luxe. There's an article from Fox in Houston on how to remove images from your home in Google Maps. and of course, and other real estate sites. And of course, when I put this in my newsletter today, I had to find the most hysterical Google Maps pictures and images I could find. And there are some really crazy ones. I actually had to leave out some of the craziest ones, though, and I just put in one that was a little more benign, but kind of funny. And what else do we have? There was something about millennials. Here we go. Here it is. I found it. Real estate moves, millennials regret. This was in Yahoo Finance. And it's an interesting article. They don't regret buying houses. They don't regret the fact that they stepped off the curb and did something. Here's what they regret the most. They regret most, 80% said they regretted not buying sooner. And that is not going to change. I'll tell you why. There's not a lot of inventory right now. Rates are high, and there's some people on the sidelines because rates are high, which means their payments are high and they can afford less. Problem is, since we have this lack of inventory, when rates come down, we're going to see prices just climbing. So that house that they could have bought now for 385 is going to be 472 when rates come down. And they're going to regret not buying it while it was 385 because they could have just refinanced it when rates came down. And the other thing they regretted, one of the other things was not being more knowledgeable. So all of you real estate professionals out here watching this, or mortgage professionals, knowledge is power. Arm your people with information, empower them, make them feel like they're in command, because that's what they haven't been feeling like. They haven't been feeling in command. So that's this episode of You Are Not Alone with Charlie Smiley. If you like this, like it, subscribe to it, do your thing. And if you have any comments or questions, you know how to reach me, hit me up. Anyway, this is You Are Not Alone with Charlie Smiley. That's all I got for today. Bye bye.